You might think complex music like prog only uses complex modes and scales, but there's a lot of music that can be drawn from simpler scales, including everyone's favorite, the blues scale.
Did you hear the news today?
The blues scale is the minor pentatonic scale with an added flat fifth. In the key of E, it looks like this. The blues scale and the blues itself can be a very useful sound to draw from when writing music. Here are two riffs from my song The Great Stereopticon that demonstrate how you can build more complex riffs from the blues scale. The first riff I want to look at comes from the bridge of the song right after the second a cappella section, and this entire riff is using the low E string and pedaling off that open E note. So one way to get a handle on a riff like this is to learn the blues scale horizontally across one string. So here's the E blues scale just on the low E string. And just with that, you can come up with all kinds of riffs. Lots of cool stuff there. The main core part of this riff looks like this. And this is in 4/4, and I'm just pulling off from fretted notes to the open string. And this is straight 16th notes, so any of the spaces between the pull-offs, I'm gonna pick that note. At the beginning, for example, pick, pull off, pick. But to make this more proggy, every other measure, I'm gonna cut this pattern short. So in the second measure, it looks like this. And that's in 3/4. And the last measure, I do what I just did, but I add one more pull off, and that makes it 7/8. So the whole thing goes 4/4, 3/4, 4/4, 7/8. Here this is slowly. And up to speed. This riff is pretty straightforward besides those measures where I cut the pattern short to get some odd time signatures. And one thing that I love about the blues scale is that it sounds fun. And in this song I wanted to inject some energy and some fun into the song, and the blues scale really helped to achieve that. And everyone knows how to play basic blues riffs on the guitar. It's one of the first things you learn on guitar. It's one of the first things I learned, that kind of stuff. And this injects a nostalgic vibe to me to have a bit of the pentatonic and blues scale in there. And it kind of gives it a classic prog vibe to me. Anytime I go for a classic prog vibe, I'll often reach for the blues scale because I think it helps to achieve that sound really well.
You need to sleep sexy. Did you hear the news today?
The second riff comes from the second verse of the song, and this is an example of taking the blues scale and making it much more complex in a really over-the-top, shreddy riff. And what I'm doing here is to add a few extra notes to the blues scale. So what I'm going to do is play a Dorian scale, which is the minor scale with a raised 6, C sharp in this case. And I'm going to add that to the blues scale. So you get a Dorian mode with a flatted 5th. Really nice sound. If we play that in a pentatonic box up high, you get a symmetrical shape, 15, 14, 12 on the top 3 strings. Really good for shreddy patterns. I originally learned this from Paul Gilbert. If you want to shred the pentatonic, that's a really good way to do it. This riff is still mostly using the blues scale though. I'm just going to bring in that sound of Dorian every once in a while, specifically with the major 6, and that's going to add some extra color to the riff. This whole riff is built around this 16th note triplet motif. There's a pattern of 6 notes on the low string right from the blues scale to a power chord. And this pattern of 6 notes from the Dorian mode. A little bluesy bend there at the end from the minor 3rd up a quarter step. All together it looks like this. That's the main core of the riff, and each time I repeat it, there's going to be slight variations in the fills I do in between. The first variation before the vocals enter looks like this. It starts with the main motif, then adds this fill, which is blues. There's the Dorian note. Pull off to that open string at the end. And the second half is this. You have the first triplet fill and then this run. And these are more triplets. Triplet, triplet, all from the blues scale. And I'm picking this by doing up, down, down, up. It's a pattern I really like. A little bit weird to start it with an upstroke if you haven't done that before, but it's a pattern that works incredibly well and flows pretty smoothly once you get it down. So the second half. There's 4 variations to this riff when the vocals are happening. The first one is very similar to what we did before the vocals kick in. Looks like this. So the first measure is exactly the same with that same fill. And the second measure uses this fill. Might be my favorite one from this whole riff. It comes from Dorian. Have that 6th up there. Pull the open G string. There's the 9th. Kind of a tricky pattern to get under your fingers, but it flows really nicely once you get it there. So all together, this first part. The second quarter of this riff looks like this. So in that first measure, on this power chord, instead of playing it twice, I play it once and do a slightly longer fill, which is all still Dorian blues with these sliding thirds. Really fun sound. And then the second measure, more of these triplet runs. So all together. And each one of these different variations is a different time signature. I'm adding and subtracting from those fills depending on how long they are, and that's making for different time signatures. So you have the main core motif that keeps repeating, but you're getting different endings to it that are changing the rhythm up. I have a whole lesson on addition and subtraction related specifically to this song. That's kind of how I built most of the odd time signatures in the song. And just by adding and subtracting from these little fills at the end, making them different lengths, you get different time signatures each time. The third variation of the riff looks like this. And you'll notice that this is no longer on the low E string, it's actually up one string on the A string. And this is another idea of bringing the blues influence in. So in a blues progression, you'd have the 1 chord for 4 bars. Then you go up to the 4 chord in bar 5, and that's a major part of the blues. It's one of the defining features of the blues really is to move to that 4 chord on the 5th bar. And up to this point, we've had 4 measures of E. So now, in the 5th bar, I'm gonna go up to A and bring in a little bit more of that blues influence. And basically, I do the same rhythm. Start with that big A minor chord, slide it down. But instead of playing runs, I'm just gonna hang out on that A string for those triplets, and then I do the same fill, up 1 string, and then I do this other fill, which is from A Dorian, because now we're rooted on A, not E. And that brings it back to E. So that whole part, and this verse actually uses a shortened blues form. So it's just the first 8 bars of the blues. So 4 bars in E, 2 bars in A, and 2 bars in E. Now in other parts of the song I actually do full blues progressions, full 12-bar blues progressions. In the first verse, as well as the weird funk polka section later on, those use entire blues progressions. So that's another way to bring the blues influence in. I'm not just using the blues scale necessarily, I'm using some blues form and some blues progressions inside of this longer prog song. That stuff to me is really interesting, and it brings more of that blues flavor into it in kind of a weird way that you wouldn't notice unless you're looking really closely. The last variation of this riff is the same as the second variation, but I used a few chords at the end to move to the next section of the song. Here's the whole verse riff played slowly right from where the vocals kick in. Here's this whole verse riff in context one more time with the tab on screen, and then I'll play the final version of the song with the vocals.
Sleep sexy, did you hear the news today? Sleep sexy, did you hear the news today? News, breaking news, the Opticon controls your mind. Cues, you are amused, the Opticon, it keeps you blind. You can't resist the prejudice of black and white.
So there's a few ideas for using the blues scale in prog riffing. I think this is a sound that a lot of people avoid, but I definitely wouldn't do that because there's a lot that you can get from the blues scale. So try a few of these ideas in some of your own riffs. And if you enjoyed this lesson, subscribe, hit the bell notification, like, comment, share. Till next time, stay proggy.